So having a strong sense of self is important, and when you put it in the context of marriage, turns out it's essential. My next guest says knowing who you are can lead to a deeper connection with your spouse. Researcher and educator Amber Price is in studio to explain. It's great to see you. Juicy topic.
Yeah,
Let's define sense of self. I don't know if we reach for that phrase as commonly. Are we thinking confidence, independence? What is
it has a lot to do with that. I think a sense of self is knowing who you are and having a clear idea of who you are and liking who you are, which has to do with that confidence that you were just saying. But the clincher with sense of self is that you're not looking to other people for approval and validation. So you can hold on to your own opinions or regulate your own emotions or things, even if other people don't necessarily agree with those. So it's really living with integrity and making choices because they're what feels right to you.
Do you find or feel, Amber, this is getting harder to do?
This is hard, right? We don't even realize how much we're looking to other people for approval and praise and validation all the time.
It used to be, in the olden days, it was just our neighbors, our friends, our family, right? That we'd have to hold our own around and in. Now it's strangers on the internet who can hit a heart button or a thumbs up, and you believe that sways people's internal confidence.
Yeah.
How does this affect our marriage then, as we talk about sense of self and the connection to our most important relationship?
Right, having a strong sense of self actually benefits your relationship in a lot of ways, but a couple of really specific ones, two specific ones. When you don't need validation or approval, specifically from your partner, but really from anyone, you're gonna show up with a lot more authenticity, right? You're gonna be willing to let people see the real you. So if that's in your marriage, you're really gonna let your spouse see you more deeply, and that's gonna build a lot more emotional intimacy and connection. And then second, if you don't need that approval and validation as much, you're gonna be able to look at yourself more clearly so that when conflict arises, because it will, it always does in marriages, right? You're gonna be willing to say, oh, how did I contribute to this? What do I need to confront in myself to improve my marriage? And if you're both doing that, how much stronger is your marriage gonna be if you're willing to look at your own part in it?
Good explanation. Can you take this too far? Sometimes I look at those boundaries or those, those self-awareness goals that we lay out, and I think, gosh, we always want to count on people around us. We want to have some sort of codependency a little bit on, I mean, what my partner thinks of me might not ultimately matter, but I care. So does it go too far sometimes in marriage?
I don't think the concept of actually having a strong sense of self does. What you're describing could, but having a strong sense of self is really, it's not about saying, I don't care what you think, or brushing other people off, or being self-centered. It's really about that, again, you've got a clear idea of who you are, a clear sense of, oh, I have weaknesses, and that's okay, and I'm willing to accept feedback about them. I'm just not needing that feedback to validate who I am.
I see. In your notes, the phrase emotional fusion jumped out at me. I haven't heard this before. Can you explain it?
Emotional fusion is similar to codependency, so you did just mention that, but emotional fusion is basically the opposite of having a strong sense of self. So somebody who's emotionally fused is relying on other people to make them feel good about themselves. Or to regulate their emotions. This happens in marriage all the time.
So it's what we don't want.
Right, we definitely don't want emotional fusion.
We don't want
and yet we're all doing it. I do it, you do it, we all do it.
To some extent. So awareness, I guess, is good all around. You have 3 things we can do to improve our sense of self within marriage. The first is to recognize habits.
Yeah, so instead of asking yourself if you do this in your marriage, ask yourself how you do this in your marriage. Pay attention to ways that you're looking to your spouse for validation and approval, or ways that you're looking to your spouse to regulate your emotions or to have responsibility for who you are instead of doing that for yourself.
What might be an example of a habit a woman could look inside and say, oh, I didn't even realize that was manifesting in that way?
Yeah, I think sometimes, like, if we have a bad day, we almost want to blame our emotions on our partner. And sometimes if it's an emotionally fused relationship, our partner's going to be like, oh yeah, I'm responsible for making you feel good. You know, we take responsibility for each other's emotions.
And that leads to your next piece of advice, which is ownership. We have to take individual ownership.
Yeah, take ownership of who you are. Take ownership of the choices you're making, of the emotions you're feeling, and don't expect somebody else to fix those for you.
What would be a sign or a telltale maybe warning that I'm not taking the ownership that I need to in my marriage? That is an area that I could afford to work on. I mean, because I think that's a hard look in the mirror moment for some people, right? To think I'm not owning my decisions and owning my life.
I think, at least for me in my relationship, usually when I start to get stressed and overwhelmed, I notice myself putting that on my husband sometimes.
Pushing the blame
Well, if you would just get the laundry done, or if you would just step up a little bit more, then I would be doing better, instead of like, maybe I've taken on too much, or maybe I, maybe I have some things to confront in myself.
Which brings up this question, what if you're on the receiving end of that? What if you've got someone trying to push that on you?
Right, and that's where you have to have that strong sense of self and say, no, you know what, I'm responsible for who I am, I'm not responsible for who you are. Now I can love and I can support and I can cheer and do all of the things that a spouse should do for the other, but I'm not responsible for the other person's well-being. Ultimately, they're responsible for their own well-being.
What's the ultimate benefit in a relationship as you've worked with couples or observed couples, researched couples, if they're able to kind of chip away at this goal of better sense of self individually? What's the collective payoff that you see happen?
I think it's really that emotional connection that you can feel, such deeper connections and better overall mental well-being and things, but really just connection and emotional intimacy and feeling like you're bringing your best self to the relationship. You don't have to be perfect. Nobody has to be perfect. But feeling like you're being the person you want to be feels great, right?
And what would you say is the characteristic trait, the underscoring characteristic that will help us get there? Is it discipline, or is it, I mean, this takes consistency. This takes, I think, some honest self-reflection.
I think that's probably the trait. Like, are you willing to take a look at yourself? Are you willing to say, hey, I probably have things I can work on?
Yeah.
Are you willing to do that?
My wheels are turning. I can feel viewers' wheels turning as well. It's an interesting concept to consider and obviously apply as you described how it affects our individual relationships. Thank you so much for bringing it to the table. Where can we see more of your work?
I've got lots of information on amberaprice.com and then on Instagram at amber.a.price.
All right, the website's on your screen. We'll link it from our website as well if you want to dive in a little deeper on this topic of sense of self and how it affects our marriage relationships. Amber, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.